President,
This senior senator from Illinois,
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Madam President, I've come to the floor of the Senate many times over the last several years to discuss an aspect of higher education which few people even know exists, the so-called for-profit colleges. This disgraceful industry enrolls 8% of all post-secondary students in America, 8%, and yet accounts for 30% of all federal student loan defaults. Those two numbers tell the story. For-profit colleges get 8% of the students and are responsible for 30% of the student loan defaults. Why? For obvious reasons. They're too expensive. They charge higher tuition than community colleges or even many private colleges. Secondly, the students don't end up finishing because they get mired in debt. And third, if they end up with a degree, it turns out to be virtually worthless. When I think of the cases that we have looked into in Illinois, in Chicago, of the exploitation of well-meaning students, sometimes the first in their families to go to college, who are lured in by the siren song of the marketing of for-profit colleges. Sign up, sign all the papers, turn over all their Pell Grants, then sign up for federal student loans and other private loans and have a disastrous experience, or they can't even finish, they're so deeply in debt. Or if they finish, to find their degree was worthless. How many of those young people I remember coming to me and saying, well, I was majoring in law enforcement, and I was getting this degree from one of the local for-profit colleges to go into law enforcement. And you know what, Senator? They laughed at me when they saw the name of the school. I said, that's not a real school. This isn't a real degree. Well, Senator, they tell me it's a real debt. And that's the reality of these for-profit colleges. I've called for greater oversight of this industry as they exploit these students and their families. We've called out some of the most vicious, predatory players in the industry, like Corinthian, University of Phoenix, DeVry, ITT Tech, and Westwood, institutions that are more likely to lead students into a lifetime of debt rather than a lifetime of opportunity. Now, just imagine, if you will, that one of the leading architects of this fraudulent industry was chosen to be one of its watchdogs by the federal government. Well, that's the situation we have today. Dr. Arthur Kaiser, who embodies the worst of the for-profit industry, is the chairman of the board of for-profit Southeastern College. He's also chancellor and CEO of Kaiser University, a so-called nonprofit university that he converted from for-profit status in the year 2011. This so-called conversion to not-for-profit is misleading. The overlap between Southeastern College and Kaiser University is well established. For example, multiple executives at Kaiser University are also executives at Southeastern. And IRS filings show that executives at Kaiser University, a supposedly nonprofit school, are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. You know, when you hear the term not-for-profit, you think of a charitable institution, people just barely making enough to get by, service to principles and values. Well, Mr. Kaiser and his gang have turned that upside down. Hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, a hefty salary for part-time employees working for a nonprofit college. Arthur Kaiser is also notorious, the so-called federal watchdog, notorious for shady dealings. I'm not making this up or going to a source of fake news for it. These were detailed in a GAO report last year. For example, In the year after Kaiser University was converted into a not-for-profit college, not-for-profit, the school paid out more than $34 million to members of Mr. Kaiser's family. $34 million? That's right, to Arthur Kaiser's family. Not bad for a not-for-profit venture. Arthur Kaiser's financial misdeeds are so grave, so serious, that his own mother has filed a lawsuit against him over shifty financial handlings of the colleges that they co-founded. This would be a dramatic situation comedy were it not for the victims, the students. Rather than being chastised by this GAO report, lawsuit by his mom, Mr. Kaiser is now seeking to dramatically extend his influence within the for-profit college industry. How exactly is he planning to do this? Well, lucky for Arthur, the power is already in his hands. Today, Arthur Kaiser serves as chair of the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, also known as NASIKI. I'd never heard of it, but those in the industry know it quite well. NASIKI is the Department of Education's federal advisory board that approves the accreditors who act as gatekeepers for federal student dollars. So in order to offer a federal student loan, the Department of Education has to first establish that you're a real school. I mean a real school with real teachers and classrooms or some other means of teaching students, and that your degree is being presented to you in its real terms, whether it's really going to help you in life. This NASIKI is the watchdog of all the federal watchdogs when it comes to for-profits. And guess who's the chair? Arthur Kaiser. As chair of NASIKI, Arthur Kaiser poses a systematic threat to student borrowers across America. His chairmanship is a major conflict of interest in NASIKI's vital role of maintaining the integrity of federal student aid. For-profits are already one of the most heavily subsidized sectors in America. I took a look at what these companies, these for-profit colleges, were taking out of the federal treasury. They put some of the worst federal contractors to shame. And of course, they often leave students saddled with debts they'll never be able to pay for worthless degrees. Now, naturally, you may wonder, how do these for-profits spend all of the federal dollars that are sent their way? Well, this is what it's all about. They spend millions on advertising their worthless degrees to underprivileged students. There was an ad that was running out here a couple of years ago, one of my favorites from the for-profits. It showed this young lady, she couldn't have been more than 19 years of age, and she was lounging on in her bedroom with her laptop on the bed next to her, talking about how she was going to college in her pajamas. I'm not making this up. They spend millions of dollars just like that, advertising to young people who may not know any better that you have to put in a real effort to get an education. It pays off, but it doesn't come to you sitting in your pajamas. Instead of reforming the for-profit advertising model, Dr. Kaiser is expanding it. He likes this marketing. He's applied some of the same predatory practices to the nonprofit, so-called nonprofit college space. In 2017, Kaiser University, aptly named after himself, which Dr. Kaiser claims is nonprofit, racked up the second highest advertising bill of any private nonprofit institution. Kaiser University spent nearly 1/5 of its entire budget on ads and marketing, more than $82 million. We found some of the colleges that have been investigated in the past were spending more money on advertising than they were on faculty salaries, and it showed. For the sake of comparison, other nonprofit colleges, real nonprofit colleges, are estimated to spend 1.5% to 6% of their budget on marketing. Dr. Arthur Kaiser, if he is a doctor, his university spent almost 20%. Southeastern College, Dr. Kaiser's for-profit school. 2018, Southeastern College reported to the IRS that 87% of its annual revenue came from federal student aid. That's dangerously close to the 90% cap imposed by the 90-10 rule. What does that mean in the big picture? It means this is just a conduit Follow, if you will, the process. The student sits in front of the admissions officer at one of these for-profit operations. The admissions officer says, you're ready to launch. We're ready to put you in the courses. All you have to do is sign this. Here's your contract. The contract where you're going to seek federal student aid. The student signs it, naturally. Got my Pell Grant, got my federal student aid. It's all going to the for-profit school. Then what happens next? Well, the student's got the debt to pay back for the loan. The school gets the cash. The school turns around, Arthur Kaiser turns around, has a big family distribution party, and the student finds out 6 months later it's a worthless undertaking. They've still got the debt to pay. And unless some action is taken by the Department of Education that proves up fraud and releases that student from his obligation, that's going to be a debt he's going to carry for years. It's going to change his life. Does Dr. Kaiser and his gang care? They got their money. They've distributed among their family members. Dr. Kaiser has also demonstrated questionable conduct as chair of NASIKI, namely protecting his own interest at the expense of students and taxpayers. This is a real fox in the chicken coop. In 2020, under Dr. Kaiser's leadership, NASIKI wrongfully penalized the Higher Learning Commission, an accreditor that tried to rescind accreditation from 2 fraudulent for-profits. Just last year, Dr. Kaiser was forced to recuse himself from the Review of Accrediting Commission of Career Schools and Colleges. What exactly did they have to recuse themselves? Because this organization accredited his college. So he was putting the pressure on him, on that entity. And in Dr. Kaiser's absence, the other NASIKI members rightly considered student outcomes in determining whether they would continue as an accreditor. But when Dr. Kaiser returned from recusal, he chastised those same members for having the gall to prioritize the needs of students. So even when he's forced to recuse himself, Dr. Arthur Kaiser, found a way to use his position as chair to advance his own interest. This week, I'm going to lead a letter with Sherrod Brown, my colleague from Ohio, requesting the Department of Education finally take a hard look at Arthur Kaiser's chairmanship and his obvious conflicts of interest. It's worth noting that we are not alone in raising these concerns about Dr. Arthur Kaiser. Earlier this month, the House Education and Labor Committee Chair, Bobby Scott of Virginia, also raised the issue of Kaiser's manipulative conversion of his for-profit college to nonprofit status. Time and again, Arthur Kaiser has put his own personal priorities over the needs of the students and taxpayers he's supposed to serve. His conflicts of interest have become abundantly clear, and now it's time for the Department of Education to put an end to this party. Last month, Secretary Cardona announced the department's education priorities. One of them is holding post-secondary institutions accountable for taking advantage of kids. Well, right now the DOE, Department of Education, has an opportunity to uphold that priority by bringing Arthur Kaiser's nefarious conduct to an end. We're going to be watching. On behalf of those students and their families, on behalf of the colleges and universities that do a good job, we've got to put an end to this ripoff. Madam President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum. Oh, I'm sorry, I yield the floor.